Hey, it's Alexi again with your Better Business podcast. And I've received quite a number of questions since our last episode on systemating a tradie business. So I thought I'd just delegate this whole episode to answering some of these questions. So let me just bring up exactly what I've received. So here we go. What are the first steps in systemizing a trades business? People want to know how to begin a process of creating systems that will make their operations more efficient and scalable. Well, that is a great question. One of the ways I would approach something like that would be by using an approach called impact and ease matrix. Now, this is a way to potentially evaluate all the current processes that you have and understand the impact that each one of those will have. So this way, you're able to prioritize areas of your business or potentially things that need to be attended first, as opposed to just going at everything. And look, as humans, I think we like to focus on things that we understand more and more familiar with. And obviously, if there are things that we entertain by, we basically spend a lot of time on those things. So try to focus on things that are urgent and important, and make sure that these will obviously create the outcome that you're actually after. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense and creates a bit of a direction there for you. Which business processes should be prioritized for systemization? Well, like I said, I think there is four distinct areas in your business. There is your marketing, there is your sales, there is operations, and there is accounting. Every business has got different problems depending on how long they've been in business. And I guess the rule of thumb is, the first thing that you're trying to resolve is your lead flow. You're really trying to get the work flow coming through. And once you've got that sorted, it's really more about understanding how you can replicate that. Can you potentially turn some systems? Can you put some system in place to automate things? Like, can you ask people for a referral once the job is done? Can you ask them for a review? You got to really understand the flow of those processes. And I think this is where a lot of people are getting stuck. In terms of sales, is there a way for you to get the best outcome, or potentially not cut corners, or cut down on price? I think you really need to address that in order to get the best outcome. Otherwise, you're going to be very busy, but potentially won't have the money at the end of the day. And I guess, look, depending on your goal, things could be different. But majority of business owners are in business because they're trying to make more money and free up time. So if that's the default, if you understand that, you should really focus on that too. How can technology be used to automate processes in the trades business? Well, that's a good question. Look, technology is there to help. It's not to take things away. And I think it's there to simplify our lives. So if you're able to implement things for, your quotes, your appointment booking, your proposals, your follow-ups, your invoices, and really make sure that it doesn't take too much of your time, and then preferably outsource that as well, I think that would be the best scenario. Look, there's many different processes to put in place. Like, you could really go as pedantic on how to hire a person, the things that you'd need to implement, the contracts that you need to have in place. But the reality is, a lot of the time you just won't have the skills nor the understanding specifically for that. So I highly advise, first of all, engaging people that are competent in these areas. There's a really good book called Who Not How by Benjamin Harvey. He talks a lot about how to reach out to the expert in these areas. And I would highly recommend for you to look at your network of people around you and see who can help you with certain tasks that you're not familiar with. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight. What are the common challenges when systemizing a business, and how can they be overcome? Well, that is a challenging question within itself. I mean, every business is going to be very different, but I think a lot of people are just not sure where to start. It's almost like they think that one thing is more important than the others, and then they get hung up on it, and then everything else goes down the drain. If that sounds familiar, I think you need to lay out the whole map of what actually needs to be addressed. And if you're not sure, I would recommend using some sort of a framework, specific for a business that's somewhat similar to yours. It's always easier to deconstruct something based on, a model or so. So if you're able to engage a business coach or someone who's done this before, or let's say, a trades business that has sort of achieved the outcome that you're after, I think it's worthwhile starting with that. You don't know what you don't know, and I think you need a little bit of clarity before you invest any time into something like that. How do you measure the effectiveness of newly implemented systems? Good question. Well, look, I think if it's time versus outcome, then you're really talking about how much time you're taking and how much time is actually being saved. And obviously, if you are implementing something with a specific return on investment behind it, you need to know exactly how much money you're making or saving as a result of that exercise. So that would be a good way to look into something like that. What training do employers need to effectively use new systems? Well, employee training is a huge topic within itself, and I suggest that you go through the implementation and process of using a system yourself before you're able to delegate it to somebody else. We often run through things fairly quickly, where your employers may be overlooking things or not keeping up with you, and as a result, you may see that people are they've learned the actual system, but then they will struggle to use the system. What I think is more important, though, is to keep them accountable in terms of using that system, whether it's a CRM that you've implemented or a quoting system or a simple calendar. I think it's about making sure that it's a day-to-day habit. It's not just something they learn and then forget about. I mean, many different systems come with all sorts of bells and whistles, but we're not going to use all those features. We're only going to really focus on what we need. So I think it's really important to understand which tools do we use, how do we use them specifically to us, and then make sure that this becomes a regular routine. So something that gets done either every day or every week or whatever that is. How can systemization help in scaling a trades business? Well, like I've outlined in the past, I think it's really more about understanding the goal. And if the goal is to scale, you're really looking to create processes, create systems for those processes, and then learn to delegate those particular tasks. So essentially, you're freeing up more time to do things that shouldn't be taking your time. So if you're a true business owner, you should really be working on the business, running the business, making sure you understand exactly what's required to run that business. Is it a matter of securing bigger contracts? Is it a matter of making sure that there is quality control in place? There will be an element of all of this, but I think for some businesses, some areas require more attention than others. Can systemization impact customer satisfaction? Absolutely. I think if you follow a particular process, it's almost like that gold standard that your business will be following. I think systemizing and making sure people understand that there is a system really makes things quite different. I mean, little things like getting uniform for your staff and potentially getting them to show up on time, introduce themselves, it really creates a different level of service, because there's nothing worse than someone just rocking up, doing a service without a lot of communication, and then leaving, unannounced and leaving a mess behind themselves like that. These are the sort of things you could really fix quite easily with, systemization basically being put in place. What are the cost of what are the cost implications of systemizing a trade business? Well, look, there's many different providers and systems that will charge you very differently. But I think at the end of the day, you need to understand how much time you're saving and what outcome you're getting as well. I mean, time is the most precious thing that we have. We don't really have any more hours in the day than anyone else. And if you're able to get some of that back, I think that's great. I've heard a saying once that, wise people buy others people's time, while, normal people basically trade their hours for money. So that could be the answer to your question. Who should be involved in the process of systemizing a business? Well, most importantly, the business owner. Business owner really needs to understand exactly what's getting systemized. But then once there are specific areas of the business that are delegated to certain people, I think they need to be involved as well. I mean, there could be an accounts person that does things a certain way, and some of the aspects of their processes need to be understood, because potentially it could be automated to a degree, or there could be a few gaps in the business where time is not really being spent efficiently. And this is something that really would make a big difference to the business. Now, I had some specific questions in relation to things like marketing, sales, and operations. So I'll just take a couple of these just for the sake of, being mindful of time. Marketing. How can I automate lead generation for consistent job flow? Well, look, I think it comes down to understanding where your market is at. If you're marketing through Google Ads or social media, you need to understand the key, metrics of how those platforms work, and if there is a seasonality aspect as well. So have a budget in place and understand exactly what that budget should be getting you. So you really got to start with goal setting. From there, you got to be able to analyze the actual quality of leads that this system generates you. And then if that works, then you need to understand how to review that on a regular basis. So as opposed to micromanaging the whole thing, I think you need to be looking at the quality of leads that you're getting in on weekly or monthly basis and see how you could potentially refine that. what a lot of people don't do is they don't review their marketing budgets often enough. And then, if they, let's say, be spending, $2,000 a month for the past 5 years, well, those $2,000 will buy you very different things based on the timing. I mean, at the moment, for example, in 2024, the cost per click has gone up quite substantially. As a result, your cost per lead goes up as well. And then you also need to understand what your competitors are doing. So to keep things consistent, I think you need to understand your budgets, your seasonality, and how the tools use and the main KPIs behind them. What digital marketing strategies are most effective for reaching local customers? Great question. Now, I think if you're looking at people who are pretty much ready to engage you straight away, the most effective way to advertise your business would be Google My Business. I think Google My Business really allows you to present yourself in a local area, backed up by your reviews, and then from there, being able to start a conversation with a customer who's specifically looking to engage for your services in the near future. I mean, look, every business has got different timelines, but if we're talking about a classic trades business, a plumber, an electrician, maybe a renovations builder and whatnot, you will get people searching in a particular area. And I think that local area has got a degree of trust behind it. That's why it's so important to position yourself in that area and align with that. How can I measure the ROI of my marketing campaigns? Well, ROI is about spending $1 and getting 5 back, if that's the ratio that you're looking at. And essentially, the biggest issue is oftentimes when this is calculated, let's say there's a Google ad budget or Facebook ad budget, the business owners themselves sometimes are not considering the cost of the provider for those services, so the agency that runs the ad. So I think you need to understand what the cost per month could be on the actual ad budget, add the actual management fees, and then evaluate the outcome. Now, the difficulty could be that you're getting leads, and essentially there is a conversion ratio from those leads as well. So you need to look at the funnel at each step. So if, let's say, you spend $2,000 and you've received, hypothetically speaking, let's say 20 leads, out of which you can converted, let's say 30%, then you need to understand the metrics behind the whole thing. Are the leads good? Is your conversion rate good? And what did you get in the end? I mean, if you're charging, $20,000 for those sort of jobs, happy days, you probably wouldn't worry too much. But if your ROI isn't quite there, that could be a big issue. And I think this is where you got to evaluate it. What are the best practices for managing online reviews and reputation for trades businesses? Oh, great question. Well, best practices is really more about, first of all, once you complete a job, you got to ask for a review, and you got to be able to facilitate the process. A lot of people try to send an email or just ask people and hope that your customer is going to go and find you online and leave a review. It's too hard. We found that the most effective way is to send an SMS to follow up that inquiry. So once again, step 1, ask for a review. Step 2, send an SMS with the actual link to leave a review and be clear that it's coming from you. And step 3, make sure you reply to that review as well. So if you are getting, negative review or not the review that you really wanted, I think it's very important to have a conversation around it. And look, it's more about showing customer service. So this is the sort of stuff that's going to be in the public domain. So if someone leaves you a negative review, you got to be able to reply to it in a professional way. And look, if a business has got hundreds of reviews, I guarantee you that the negative reviews will be the ones people look at first, because they want to know the sort of experience that people are getting. And if your response is quite rough, or potentially you're saying, hey, I don't know who you are, and this is the response to the last 10 customers, you're going to lose a little bit of trust there. So make sure that you maintain reputation by clear communication, because it's going to be up there in the open. So I've got a couple of questions here in relation to sales. Okay, so how can I streamline the quotation and proposal processes for new jobs? Now, in terms of streamlining, it's really more about systemizing once again, right? So if you are able to create a proposal that works for you, or a quote that works for you, I think it's about understanding the 80-20 principle behind it. So what's the 80% of the quote that looks exactly the same versus the 20% that actually changes? So if you haven't looked into something like that, or you're sending out just those simple zero quotes or whatever quote system you use, I highly recommend that you look into this. I think it's good to use a system like PandaDocs or Proposify or something that adds a lot more to the actual quote as opposed to just the numbers. Because what people really want to know about is how and why they should be using your business as opposed to everybody else. Because look, if you're getting 3 or 4 quotes from people and it's just numbers for, let's say, building a swimming pool, for example, you will find that it's very difficult to operate on that information. But if you are getting things like, hey, here's what my insurance is like, and here are the projects that I've done in the past, and this is what my process is like, and this is what the timelines look like, that really gives people more to operate with. Because if you're doing the bare minimum of sending out a quote with just the prices, that's the only thing that will help them make their decision. So really, the job is to make sure that you can, clearly highlight things like timelines. How long is it going to take for a particular project, or stages of the project? What materials are going to be used if it's relevant? If is there some sort of a safety process around this? Is there some sort of an insurance process if things don't go according to plan? What else is there that they should know about your business? Maybe you're supporting an organization that they could be passionate about. And you'll see that majority of your competitors will not have anything close to it. So Panadox, Proposify, I've got quite a few templates. I highly recommend looking at that. You'll find that ServiceMate has got also pretty cool proposals, and you can do a lot of other things within them as well. Another question is, what training techniques can improve my team's closing rates? Good question. Well, look, getting your teams to perform when it comes to sales, I think, is really a matter of standardizing the whole process. Because if one person does things one way and then the other person do it the other way, you will not be able to help them in the same way. Like, one person will need one thing and then the other. But really, what you're wanting to do is to create a system that you can execute yourself, and then basically pass it on to everybody else. Reason being is that this way you can actually impact the entire business as opposed to each person individually. So I think, personally, the whole sale process, especially for bigger ticket items, happens from the whole follow-up process. So if that initial conversation has got a pretty good follow-up process or a summary afterwards, that makes things easier. So what I mean by that is, let's say a person goes out and quotes for a new roof. Then they basically send out a proposal. And then if from there, you've got a bit of a standard process to follow that up, I think that would be the best way to do it. And look, we could be talking about things like sending an SMS message saying, have you had a chance to look at your proposal? And that could be the trigger for the person to then call and follow up. Like, there's a lot of automation that you can put in place in order to follow that exact process. The biggest thing there, I guess, is timelines. If you got an understanding as to how long it's going to take for someone to review a quote, and if a quote has been seen, then I guess that gives you more insightful information to start a meaningful conversation. How can I integrate upselling into my service process? Well, look, I think many businesses don't address selling from the upsell perspective because they're too focused on the main service. And I think to understand how to slot in upselling requires understanding the bigger picture. Let me give you an example. So one of our clients does roofing business. And as a part of the whole roofing thing, they basically look into, why does the person inquire about this? And we're talking about roofs for existing homes, typically re-roofs, right? So, what's the motivation behind each job? And this is a bit of an awkward question to ask, but what you're really looking to uncover is the true driver as to why the customer wants to do this. So you'll find a lot of the time that the person's trying to do a renovation. And then if you ask that question again, it's like, what's the motivation for the renovation? Say, well, look, we're actually looking to start a family. Now, if the customer's wife is already pregnant, let's say 3-4 months, you've got a certain timeline to get things in place. And if you understand the whole idea as to what this couple is trying to achieve, then you could not only offer your roofing business, but also a lot of other things based on the convenience and the timing around what they have. So it's more about understanding the bigger picture, the whole customer journey, and seeing how you can slot things in. I mean, these people want the best outcome possible within the actual timelines that they have. And this is where you really need to slot in your upselling. I hope that makes sense. What metrics should I track to evaluate sales performance effectively? Well, look, I think if we're talking about the classic scenario, I think it's first of all about having a number of conversations initially that could then potentially be transferring into quotes or appointments, and then from there the actual close rate. You do need to evaluate the actual timeline as well, because if the timeline is too long, then you may have to break it down a bit further, because some people take a while to pull the trigger. And this is where the whole, weekly, monthly stuff cannot potentially help you identify how good or bad something is. All right, operations. What scheduling software best handles the variability of trades businesses? Well, look, there is obviously a whole bunch of different tools like Tradie, ServiceMate, geo. There's a whole bunch of different ones. I think it really depends on your industry, and it really depends on where you are looking to make a win. I know that a lot of plumbers and electricians like to use ServiceMate for the reason that there's a really good tool for inventory and allows you to really track all the expenses on the small things. So I think it really is important to understand how one system could potentially factor in other things as well. Scheduling is probably the most basic thing that you want to look at. But if you're just wanting to get started with something, Google Calendar, I think, is the easiest thing. Everyone's got it on their phone. It's very easy to set up and share. And yeah, that's probably what I'd recommend the most. You can do the same thing for scheduling appointments with customer. If a customer needs to book appointments with you, we use a tool called Calendly. That is a really simple tool for you to, I guess, allow a block of time that people would want to be scheduling into. So everything else would be blacked out, and they can do it in reverse as well. So it really depends. But yeah, I would typically try to look into a system that does more than just scheduling, where you can consolidate processes or basically be a step ahead. How can I ensure quality control across multiple job sites? That is a tricky question. I think that quality control is something that something that a lot of businesses potentially don't have a system around, because they sort of initially think that they follow the same thing over and over, but things often fall through the cracks. And the bigger the operations get, the harder it is. I mean, if you're building the same thing over and over, it'd be easier. But if you're doing very custom things or looking at each job separately, it could be fairly tricky. I think the main thing here is about accountability, making sure that the process has been done. Because I found that when people get busy or there's too many things to do, oftentimes staff really starts to jump over things like, hey, if there is a checklist for people to complete, make sure they do this. And that's probably the best way to complete that. We've seen a few businesses do like checklists in a digital format. So, let's say one would be about assessing the job initially before doing it. They will check everything off. And this could be done for many reasons, not just the actual operations, but also the safety, make sure that they follow a safety procedure and afterwards check that off as well. I think the one thing that really enables that quality control is the whole why. If you really make it, important enough for people to do that, they will do it. I find that quality control, for a staff member could just be another exercise, whereas for you, that'll be the deal breaker, whether you're going to get paid or not. So you really need to make sure that you put some mechanism in place or maybe incentivize that, if that makes sense. Now, a few accounting questions that I got here as well, and we're nearly done. How can I automate invoicing and payment collection to improve cash flow? Automating invoicing could be done through things like Xero, where they integrate with other systems. So if you do your quotes out of like ServiceMate, you should be able to pass that on to Xero to send out an invoice, or vice versa. You can do invoices in other systems and then have Xero mirror that as well. I find that adding various payment gateways, such as Stripe, such as Go Cardless, which does direct debit, really helps people pay faster. A lot of people still love their points, so credit cards is still the key. So one thing I reckon that you should be looking to use this whole stuff is to actually get a deposit before you start doing any jobs. I am tired of hearing a lot of tradies complaining about the fact that they haven't been paid. And the reality is, depending on, whatever industry you're in, there's usually percentage that you are able to invoice the customer for based on, the size of the job and all the other parameters. Or make sure you get paid first, and make sure you enable all the payment methods to allow for that and make it easy enough. Stripe, Xero makes it super simple. Things are sent by email. There are automatic follow-ups, and that works really, really well. How frequently should financial forecasts and budgets be updated? I'm terrible at this, to be honest. The whole financial forecast thing is something that I think most businesses should review at least, twice a year, but it really depends on your growth, because a lot of the time your expenses may go through the roof. I mean, over the last 2 years, 22, 23, 24, you will see that the cost of labor has gone up quite substantially, which impacted everything else. So in that particular sense, I think evaluating your forecasting a lot more regular definitely needs to be done. Whereas if you're running a fairly linear job where you're repeating the same sort of thing and the cost of products and labor isn't really an issue, then I think every 6 months or so should be fine. The whole budgets thing is another story. I guess it's just about moving parts. If your insurance is growing consistently, if you keep buying machinery, if you keep turning stock, that's something you need to review. And a lot of the time, I think it's about using some sort of a benchmark. Create yourself a benchmark. What is it that you should be following, and are you in line with that? And there's lots of different systems that you could put in place to automate that and help you realize, if you're overspending or underspending potentially. What are the best practices for payroll management in trade businesses with seasonal fluctuations in staffing? Oh, great question. I think personally, really depends on the type of business you're running. I personally think that working with contractors and potentially having a 80-20 split, depending on the nature of your business, is probably a safer way to go. There's nothing worse than getting into like a rain season where you can't work and you've got all these employees. Like, what are you going to do, right? So if you got contractors offsetting that, at least that's not really your problem. However, then contractor retention, that could be an issue as well. There's no really ideal scenario for this, but I think seasonal fluctuations and payroll. Well, look, I think majority of people here in Australia, love to get paid weekly, some fortnightly, but weekly seems to be the way to go. I think it's just about making sure that things are streamlined. If you're working with contractors, make sure that you've got an easy way for them to invoice you and everything's submitted by a certain date. If it's obviously with your staff, I think once a week payment shouldn't be a drama, but you may want to utilize an external resource to make sure everything's calculated properly, because there could be a lot of moving parts. Time tracking certainly works well here as well, and this is available through a bunch of different workflow systems. But look, yeah, payroll whole thing as a management is another whole can of worms. I highly recommend that you speak to your accounts or bookkeeping person about this. And the whole seasonal fluctuations, man, just make sure you've got yourself some flexibility in terms of commitment. Otherwise, you will end up with a lot of staff where you are paying them, but you can't do any work. I mean, roofing businesses notorious for that. Like, you will get rain season where they can't do absolutely anything. And this is where it's good to diversify and have like a secondary avenue, like let's say renovations, where you can still do some work even if it's raining and stuff. I mean, if the renovation type allows for something like that. Anyway, these are quite a few questions that I've received. Obviously, happy to answer any more. If you got any questions, feel free to send them my way. My name is Alexei. Yeah, happy to have a chat if you got any questions, and have a good one.